Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Storm Team 8 meteorologist Ian Oliver. I'm here with,
Meteorologist Julie Phillips.
and we are continuing to track Hurricane Irma. We just got some new information in from the National Hurricane Center, the 2 p.m. update. I was doing this update with Steve last night. It was yesterday evening. The storm was a Category 4 with 140 mile per hour winds.
It's amazing how quickly the intensification process is occurring with it. And 185 mile per hour is the max winds is an incredibly strong hurricane.
It's already now getting towards the top of the record books here as we look on record for hurricanes. There's only been 5 that have reached 185 miles per hour or better, and it's the most intense storm in the Atlantic. You got to go back to 2005, Wilma, that historic season, a couple of them back-to-back, 2004 and 2005. So this is a huge hurricane of high-end Category 5 storm, and unfortunately it's moving towards the Leeward Islands now.
Yeah, and that's why, again, we're going to update you so much over the course of the next couple of days as we get a very good idea of where it's going. There is still a little bit of uncertainty out there, but at this point, we know pretty much everyone in Florida should at least have some of their basic preparations going at this point. You know, make sure you have things like water and some extra food, things like that to prepare for a potential power outage. But I know there's already some chaos and stuff going on at the stores, so you want to...
Right. All right, let's get right to it then. We'll show you the latest from the National Hurricane Center. This is from the hurricane hunters. They're out in the storm this afternoon, and what they're finding is what led to the upgrade at the 2 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center. Minimum surface pressure, 923 millibars, and maximum sustained winds at 10 seconds, close to 185 miles per hour. So that's where we're at right now with this 2 p.m. advisory. From the Hurricane Center, max winds at 185. That direction still to the west at 14 miles per hour, but there is some component now of northerly motion, which is really what we've been waiting on for the last several days now.
Right. And you can see right now, just on that satellite imagery, such a well-defined hurricane. You can see, that large, well-defined eye. And unfortunately, I mean, this is, a powerful Category 5, just pretty much directly heading towards the northern.
Yeah, it's got that classic buzzsaw shape. It's gone through a number of eyewall replacement cycles over the last several days, so we saw a lot of fluctuation in intensity, but now it's just really got its act together. It's a classic storm at this point. Here's the forecast track. This isn't updated in the intermediate advisory at 2 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. We will get a new track coming up at 5 o'clock with the complete update, but they did bump up the intensity, as we mentioned, 5 miles per hour.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, this is going to maintain strength because there's not much to really impede it or slow it down at this point. So it's going to maintain that Category 5 strength through most of this week. And then you notice on that forecast track, maybe a little bit of weakening as we head towards the end of this week. But, just expect it to stay a very strong hurricane, especially intensity forecasts can be tough at times. But with this general track, the general direction of the U.S. and Florida, we're going to watch this real closely.
Yeah, we'll show you that coming up in just a moment. But warm sea surface temperatures, low vertical wind shear, that's the recipe for an intense hurricane. That's exactly what this system has been enjoying really the last couple days. And as it moves through the islands, forecast track takes it just north of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, which would kind of be shooting the gap right above the land masses, which would disrupt that circulation some, stays over that warm water, and that's what's really going to allow it to maintain its intensity. As we mentioned, hurricane warnings, northern part of the Leeward Islands there, into the Virgin Islands, the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico now as in a hurricane warning as the system will be becoming uncomfortably close to that area. Also, Hispaniola, the Bahamas, now in a hurricane watch. And it's important not to look at the center of that cone of uncertainty because with this storm, hurricane force winds are extending out about 60 miles. Tropical storm force winds 160 miles. So this was, over the last few days, a very compact storm. Now it's started to grow.
And it's a large storm. And also, again, it can shift a little bit farther north, south, and of course that can affect places like Hispaniola or Cuba, depending on the exact track.
So now this forecast cone is taking you out to 5 days. Still a strong Category 4 storm, 145 miles per hour. That cone of uncertainty at day 5 is 225 miles wide. So obviously, that's about double the diameter of the state of Florida at its widest point. So that's going to determine exactly the kind of impacts that we see, because not really suggested in this forecast cone, you're starting to see right at the end there, is that turn to the north that we're expecting.
And the models have been watching this for a while, and you can see that on the spaghetti models, pretty much over the next several days, they're in pretty good agreement of the track of this storm. But it's as we head into this weekend and that potential turn north, just how early it turns to the north would have huge implications of when impacts are felt across Florida, which cities in Florida, would be impacted the most by this storm. So it's really, 100 miles can make such a big difference.
Absolutely. It's what we saw last year with Hurricane Matthew, of course. That center of circulation, it was still devastating for some, but that center of circulation stayed just offshore, about 50 miles or so, where that's kind of exactly what we're seeing here. Some of the latest forecast guidance is suggesting more of an East Coast track, but we're more than 5 days out at this point. It's really late Saturday, Sunday, where we would see the big impacts from Irma. So that track will change.
It definitely will. Of course, farther east would be better for us. Not good for the east coast of Florida, but still too close to call.
These are two reliable forecast models, the GFS and the European model. Center of the bullseye is the center of the hurricane, the lowest central pressure. And you notice they're really in remarkable agreement through the next several days.
Because even this is almost 4 or 5 days out at this point this weekend, and both of the models that we look very closely at are very close. So that's actually nice that we do have some consistency there.
There you go. Sunday, now we're into the second half of the weekend, and we're moving into the early part of next week. There's that track right up the East Coast as suggested by the GFS. The European model is farther back to the west. It's more over the center of the state. That's the old model, though. That's the 0Z run from last night. So we should start to get brand new information into our weather system probably as soon as the next few minutes here. So that's something we'll watch out for, and we'll see if the European model is starting to agree
because
more
this
with the
is
GFS.
the newer GFS, and this did shift a little bit farther east with the latest model that came out. So we'll watch that very closely.
And as Julie mentioned just a few minutes ago, the environment that this storm is experiencing, these are sea surface temperatures. They're in the mid-80s. You want at least low 80s for tropical development. Mid-80s is ripe stuff, essentially fuel for a tropical
And
system.
with the current track, we are expected to stay north of Hispaniola, Cuba, places that could potentially weaken the storm if it were to move over them. But with the eye staying to the north, we don't expect that to happen at this point.
So there's the forecast track there with the spaghetti plots through the northern part of the Leeward Islands. The red shading you're seeing there is low wind shear. So if you don't want to think of it as good, but red is good for the intensity of the hurricane, whereas the blue shading would be less favorable. And you notice out ahead of the spaghetti plots as we move through time, very low wind shear, which is going to allow the system to maintain its intensity through that kind of zone here that includes the Keys, northern part of Cuba, the Bahamas, that general area where we're very confident where the storm is heading before it makes that turn to the north. There's nothing between now and then that would really be much of an impediment to it.
Right. So at this point, we are fairly confident of what we think the intensity of the storm will be in a few more days. Sometimes, the intensity forecasts, they're tough sometimes, but this one, we think it is going to maintain, category 4 or 5 at that point, just a major hurricane as we approach the weekend.
All right. So the take-home messages, we're getting word here that, of course, there's been a run on some of the markets and stuff, the water and whatnot. You should have your hurricane plan in place. Ideally, that should happen
June
before
1st. So.
Yes. September 10th, Sunday, is the statistical peak of hurricane season. So you want all your non-perishable items, water, all that stuff is good to have in your kit. You also want to have your plan in place at this point. We're not yet at the point where you need to put that plan into action, but this is definitely a storm that you just need to be aware of.
And things, of course, to remember, some that you can do it ahead of time just in case we were to have to put that plan in place. Medications are always a thing you want to get taken care of ahead, have some cash on hand just in case you need them. Hopefully we don't, but if you have them on hand now, we have seen on the news, Costco, things like that are already running out of water. So hopefully those stores can continue to restock because main effects from this storm would be Sunday and Monday. So we do still have a good bit of time. And you can, be creative as well with, water. I had an empty large jug at home, filled that up just to have it on hand in case you needed it. So have your plan in place. So if you need to act on it, you can, and you're all prepared. At this point, we're not at that point just yet as we don't know exactly which part of Florida will be the most impacted from the storm. Of course, if it takes that far easterly path, the impacts here in the Tampa Bay area will be far less than if it takes that more westerly path.
And sorry, I'm not trying to be rude here. I'm leaning off screen, but I'm reading the comments from you guys on my phone, and I'm seeing don't forget the pets, of course. You want a gallon of water per person per day, but then you got to include your pets there. I've got pups. Julie's, of course,
I have 2 dogs, so your plans need to include them. So if you've got your food, make sure you've got the dog food, the cat food to last you for a bit. I think the main thing we could potentially expect is power outage, so be have a way to be comfortable for a few days in case that does happen as we head into next week. At this point, Ian's checking our Facebook Live session, going through some of the comments and questions that you guys have to answer some of those.
Yeah, of course, a lot of folks asking, about their town, which of course makes sense. It's just too early to call. It's Sunday into Monday. That forecast is going to change. There's a reason why at day 5 the cone is 225 miles wide, because there is a degree of uncertainty.
So at this point, we're just going to be talking about the Tampa Bay area in general. As it gets closer, then we can get more specific on different areas and different impacts there. But at this point, we don't even know the exact path, when it's going to make that turn to the north to be able to give you that exact information and have it be accurate just yet.
And needless to say, obviously, the farther east the track, the lesser the influences on us. We'd be on the weaker side of the storm, the drier side of the storm, the lesser winds, and of course, the farther west is not a good thing for the Tampa Bay area.
But if you're, planning ahead right now and you're wondering what would be the earliest we could start to feel any impacts at all at this point, it would be Sunday. So again, that's a good about 5 days away at this point. And the good news is, I'm sure what has heightened a lot of the awareness with the storm is Harvey, which was just a few weeks ago. And do remember that Harvey was a very powerful storm as well, but it also kind of sat over one area. We don't have anything that's expected to stall the storm out at this point, so we would expect it to at least keep moving. Just have to figure out the exact path to give you accurate impacts over the next few days.
Some people joining us late, they want to see the track one last time, so let's get this thing backed up and show people
and again, this is the track that was issued actually at 11 a.m. We get the latest track in at about 5 p.m., so either at the end of the 4 o'clock broadcast or right at the top of the 5, Steve Jervy will be in with that latest track as well. But here it is now.
Yeah, and of course, we'll be here on Facebook Live. We got a bunch of these planned throughout the day in the next several days, and we'll have our evening newscast. Lee will be back here in the morning as well. But yeah, here you go. There's the forecast cone. Near term, this is a potentially catastrophic and deadly storm for the Leeward Islands there. As you notice, the path, it's pretty much unavoidable at this point as it moves off to the west. It's going to go on or very near those islands. And as we mentioned, this isn't just a point forecast. It's a big wind field with the storm of at least 60 miles, the hurricane force winds.
And depending on the exact track, we hope it stays a little north of Puerto Rico, but at this point, it's kind of in the direct path as well.
And you notice that slight throttle back of the intense. It's really difficult for a tropical system to maintain the type of, this is high end. It's kind of like RPMs revving out. This thing's essentially revved out right now, and you would think that it'll bounce back a little bit, and that is reflected here in the intensity forecast by Wednesday morning back down to 175, which is still a very intense Category 5 storm. Then it moves. That cone does include part of Puerto Rico, so you can't rule out a landfall there just yet, but it moves in that general direction, and then as it continues, press the space bar, that's not the right computer, and that continues to go off to the north and west from there. And as we were talking about earlier, just for the folks that joined us a little bit later in this broadcast, there is day 5, Sunday at 8 a.m. That's 225 miles wide. That includes Cuba, all the way up to the northern part of the Bahamas there. So there is uncertainty, but we know the storm's large enough that it's going to impact something.
And there's a reason that we don't put the middle track on the cone. We don't draw that in because at Sunday at 8 a.m., potentially this storm could be anywhere from east of Florida to over Cuba. So at this point, we have that whole bit of uncertainty about where exactly the storm will be. So it's important to look at the whole cone when we are this far out.
And as we mentioned, the National Hurricane Center puts out a 5-day cone. If it was a 6-day cone, you would see it going north from there. We don't know exactly where it's going to make that turn to the north. So that's what we're going to really need to pin down here over the next several days.
Yeah, probably the next day or two, we'll have an even better idea of, the Florida impacts and which parts of Florida will be most impacted from the storm.
All right, well, we got our regular, we've got updates on the half hour on News Channel 8. We've got our regular newscast coming up with Julie. That's at 4 o'clock. Steve is on his way in shortly. He'll be on at 5. We'll get the new update at 5. Yes. That's really kind of the next event with this that we'll be looking forward to.
We pretty much at this point, we look for each update and the different trends in the models and the new tracks.
And we'll have the new information from this afternoon's Euro run as well.
All right, thanks for joining us. We'll have more updates on Facebook Live and on air soon.